want. So I'm ready to introduce the next group of panelists. Again, in the spirit of continuity, one of the panelists will be Paul, who just delivered the presentation for AXA. So Paul, you will forgive me, I will not repeat your bio here. The third panelist is Jeb Kemperman, who also participated in our panel this morning. And then the second panelist that we have today is John Spears. John Spears, who is the Vice President for Marketing and Business Development at Global Excel Management in Canada. John joined Global Excel in 2003 as Vice President of Marketing. His expertise is mainly on the US healthcare, as well as the understanding of the needs of Global Excel's clients. And so this effectively is the foundation to provide new sales and marketing strategies for the whole Global Excel organization. John describes himself as a lively and informative presenter, and I have absolute confidence that his intervention in this panel will further testimony to these abilities. And I'm looking forward to therefore kick off this panel, where we will have, again, an interactive discussion, a number of topics on which I will ask my fellow panelists to expand a little bit on the various topics. And if you wish, the conductor, the main focus on this panel would be on the impact of coronavirus and the changes that this has brought to health insurance policies and strategies. Clearly, you don't need to hear it from me. Coronavirus has had a dramatic impact on society, on economy, on politics, and certainly, last but not least, on health insurance. So we wanted to tackle a fairly organic analysis of this impact across multiple metrics that are part of the health insurance experience. So we will talk about how it will impact or how it has impacted claims, operations, service delivery, revenues, the digitalization of tools for service delivery, as well as some of the more institutional topics like drafting of terms and conditions in insurance policies, to try and give you a quick but fairly comprehensive overview of this. So I would like to introduce from my end the first topic of attention, and it's a topic for our newcomer, for John, to focus in particular on the moment of truth, on the claim. So, John, please share with us your view on the impact of COVID-19 in health insurance, specifically on claims.
Marco, thank you very much for the introduction, and I commend as well the previous speakers, who I think touched on a number of excellent points previously. I think one often hears in these past weeks and months, Marco, terms like unknown and unprecedented and a new reality. And I think these terms can be applied to the claims process as well. There is no question that the COVID crisis had a massive impact on claims processing, not only for Global Excel, but for our colleagues who process claims around the world. Just a very simple example. We received more claims in 2 weeks, in the last 2 weeks of March, than we would have typically processed in an entire year. And this naturally has a significant impact on the company, on our processes, and certainly there is no question about it, on how we would approach things in the future. So the COVID crisis has impacted us, and I think I could say in ways that we just didn't anticipate, if you know what I mean, Marco.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you. I can certainly, I certainly agree with you on this. I can also give you, perhaps, if you allow me to step out of my role as a moderator and chairman, also to give you my experience as an insurer, which may sound perhaps a little cynical, but it's the truth. So far, the impact of COVID-19 on the claims experience has been fundamentally positive. When we're talking about private health insurance, most of the medical intervention determined by COVID-19 has been deployed in public facilities, which therefore have had a sort of a, again, containment effect for private insurers on the one side. And on the other side, what also we have experienced is that a wide range of elective treatments have been postponed because of the impact of COVID-19, and many of these are not likely to repeat. The typical case is the physiotherapy session, okay? If you were not able to go to the physiotherapy because of the lockdown, etc., chances are that 6 months down the road, you probably won't need to go again. So, of course, some medical conditions might have worsened in the process, no doubt, but other medical conditions simply either might have been below a certain threshold or disappeared altogether. So, as a result, many insurers, and I do talk to my peers about this, are experiencing actually a positive impact in terms of the pure claims experience, which doesn't lessen the society impact of the COVID-19 in any possible way. We only strictly speaking here from the point of view of the economy of an insurer.
Yeah,
but
sorry, Marco, I agree with you, but the question I think that one needs to ask is this. We've seen this as well. We manage large blocks of business, what we call major medical business, which is moving very complex claims into the United States, into the UK, and into Germany for treatment. Okay, and these primarily come out of the Middle East and out of Latin America. And indeed, as hospitals shut down their elective services, we saw a shift. Okay, we needed, instead of moving people into the United States of America, all of a sudden we were moving people into Germany. The question I would have for you as an insurer, as a risk taker, Marco, you may have seen a reduction in healthcare claims cost this year. Could next year be twice as bad because things that didn't take place this year may be taking place next year? And could those claims next year be more severe because the treatment didn't take place this year?
Well, of course, it's difficult to predict in full this. My broad answer is maybe as an actuary, and you apologize, and I apologize for this. My answer is there is a high probability that the answer is yes. Okay, so there is a high probability that we can see both a heightened frequency and severity of claims for the same diagnostic class and benefit category that we would have experienced in prior years because of the effect that you've just explained. How certain are we of this? It's hard to tell, but it's fair to say there is a high probability that this will happen.
Yeah, I agree.
Good. Not to hold the conversation because I'm supposed to be just a moderator, but like you all, I am passionate about these topics. I'm happy to move to the next focus for our panel. And I would like to call to our virtual board, Paul. And I have a question for you, Paul. We're talking about the impact of COVID-19. We talked a bit about claims, but a very important impact is also on the service delivery, and in particular, when this service delivery is managed through the help and enhancements brought by digitalization and digital tools. So can you comment to us a bit about the impact on this specific aspect?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. When COVID first really happened and the lockdowns really first started to happen, we saw an unbelievable acceleration in demand for the service. Not only because patients couldn't access care, people didn't stop getting sick, people didn't stop having issues, and they very much quickly realized that they had this access to this service. And there was a time around then I sort of wished that GPs grew on trees because we were trying to get as many doctors on as quickly as we could. But it really disrupted for our insurance partner and for other partners that we work with, it really disrupted their entire proposition And we're looking for digital tools so that in that period that they could be there for their people. And so with AXA, we were part of their customer promise announcement in April, because they were really looking at trying to bring as much of their digital ecosystem, digital partners together to be delivering services. So in terms of the adoption and service through digital platforms, especially in the first couple of months of COVID, really, one, you saw this massive acceleration, patients using it, GPs actually wanted to come on to deliver services through it. But also in terms of insurers and hospital groups and others, some of those that were pretty far behind were really looking at how can I quickly offer something in the market. We saw regulators reducing regulatory barriers or looking at sort of different ways of offering services. But what's interesting though is that is going to come back. The world will go back to some sort of new norm, and regulators will start looking at things like privacy, data, and security. So we had a number of people who would come to us and effectively looking at Zoom for Doctors mechanism, or looking at Microsoft Teams as being a safe and effective way of delivering clinical services to people. And those times will sort of come to an end at some point. And so really, in terms of managing sort of the adoption of tools, looking at and ensuring there's greater integrations between digital providers and insurers to be delivering those services and offering some really lasting change. Because I think people's perception of the use of these tools, I was, Marco, down in Italy this summer and meeting with some people around, in the past, I think Italy was maybe a little less certain about wanting to use a digital modality, especially to talk to a doctor. And people are definitely seeing that change. So I think some of those perceptions are changing. Just last point, and then I'll sort of hand it back to you. But I think there has been a massive increase in demand for mental health tools and support. And I think that has been, we've seen it. We have really been looking at augmenting how we could deliver mental health to our patients. But people staying at home, people being locked up, people not locked up, but people feeling locked up, I guess, and needing that, they especially need that kind of support, and really, finding appropriate mental health digital tools that can really provide a safety net, provide some support, has really been a big change as well. And so I think it is bringing to light the value of some of those tools in a digital journey.
Thank you very much, Paul. I think your comments are spot on. Evidently, the logistic challenges caused by COVID-19 have given a big push to the accelerated development of digital tools that can provide a very high quality member experience in spite of these logistic limitations. Telemedicine is, as you said, it's a clear example. Also because people are becoming more comfortable with this technology. I mean, a year ago, very few of us were using regularly, let alone know technologies like Zoom or Teams. Yeah. Now it's a commonplace and it's become a proxy for communicating. Nobody says, I'm going to make a video call or a phone call. Yeah. Everybody says, I'm going to Zoom you or I'm going to make you on Teams.
Yeah, on that, traditionally in the last 4 years, typically because through our service, at least, you could use both a video or a phone consultation with a doctor. And typically we saw about 40% preferred video, 60% was phone. With COVID, we've seen the complete opposite. It has gone 75% go to video, because I think people not only are used to using these tools, but also want that sort of interaction. Sorry, there's just one last point too. I wanted to connect to John, a good fellow Canadian, what he sort of spoke about. I think from a claims perspective, I think, insurers have been challenged to being able to pay out claims because hospitals would get shut down or be, at least in the UK, commandeered by the NHS. People will still need to get services, and there's such a large backlog in these public systems that we're seeing people not only going to their insurer, thinking about private sort of private insurance in terms of getting their care needs, but also self-pay. And so I wonder if people are looking at, and I think a challenge for insurers will be, yes, people will have their caps or their excesses or their amounts that they're allowed within their policies. Are there mechanisms for members to top up or to pay more to get that? Because they don't want to wait 2-3 years now to get a back problem solved because the public system is so backed up. So I think that is going to be an interesting challenge on the claims perspective going forward.
Yeah, and if I could jump in, Marco, on that particular comment there, I think if there's one thing that I think insurers have learned is this: directing patients to the proper treatment, to the proper care at the right time, at the right place, is essential these days. Dr. Mills mentioned this, the digitization of the whole process. Yes, but what we found is that if we can get a hold of that patient before they go to treatment, we can then direct them into the appropriate care, making sure that the care is available there. Dr. Mills didn't mention it, but one of the most expensive treatments, COVID treatments in the United States right now is ECMO treatment. Okay, extremely expensive, costing in the millions of dollars. Okay, for ECMO treatment, and it is kind of the treatment of last resort for COVID patients. Not every hospital offers ECMO treatment. Hospitals that offer ECMO treatment may not have the capacity to take that patient. So I think Paul brings up a good point. How can you help the patient get the proper care they need? And this triage process, it will be there in the future, Paul. I agree with you. Future, what we, Marco, you mentioned this, the advent of telemedicine. Well, we've seen that spike. It may drop off a little, but telemedicine is here to stay. Sure. Visiting physicians, sending a physician in to visit a patient is here to stay. So the insurance industry, the healthcare industry will transform. Okay, there's no question about that.
Thank you very much. Thank you, John, and thank you, Paul. I think we can move to our third topic of this discussion for this panel, and I would like to call our friend Jeb now on the board. And we've discussed a little bit about the delivery of services, digitalization, the impact of claims. There is also let's call it a statutory impact of COVID-19 on the activities of a health insurer. Jeb represents a very large health insurer in the Netherlands. And I wanted to ask for his views and opinions, as well as experience, on how this has and will impact, in particular, the terms and conditions of the policies, the wordings, what is included, what is excluded, how the pandemic concept is being considered by insurers, and what considerations can be made around this topic. Over to you, Jeb. I don't know if it's on mute. I don't see Jeb yet participating. Never mind. Guys, if you allow me to step in again and maybe say my opinion about this, this is not prepared, okay? It's just that I also, as you know, work for a large insurer. We do deal with these type of things. And I will just give you some snippets here. Clearly, in general terms, the insurgence of COVID-19 has dictated all insurers, large and small, to effectively have to take a position with regards to the issue of pandemics. Now, traditionally, many of you know it better than I do, pandemics tend to be an exclusion clause in policies, okay? So typically, they are excluded for a number of reasons. One of the main reasons is that it is extremely difficult to find a suitable reinsurance coverage for the pandemic risk. Because pandemic risk, by definition, is an unknown risk, unpredictable, rare, etc. However, this very often clashes with the market view of this. Clients don't want to hear about these limitations. Clients want to hear simply two words, three. You are covered. They say, I'm paying for the premium. I don't care what happens. If I'm sick, I want my insurer to pick up the bill and pay the claim. Simple as that. So as a result, market pressure are effectively dictating two things. On the one hand, a complete redesign of the policy terms and conditions whereby pandemic exclusion clauses are actually waived, formally waived. And there are quite a few insurers that have taken this stance. They said, you know what, we will waive it, okay? But instead, other insurers are taking a slightly compromised type of approach. And they're saying, well, the exclusion still stands, but we will continue to honor the coverage. So in other words, it's a sort of a commercial concession and so on. How will this evolve in the future? Hard to tell. In my opinion, one of the differentiating factors will be whether reinsurers will be able to implement a sufficiently tight pricing and modeling in order to provide a reliable capacity and pricing for the pandemic risk. If we have this in place, then insurer can adopt a far more transparent and straightforward policy with regards to including pandemics in their policy, because they will have a reliable backup from insurers. That backup for the time being is not quite there. But evidently, it is an important point because, as we discussed this morning, a pandemic may be an exceptional event, but is by no means a rare event. Somebody mentioned that Bill Gates said it, look, pandemics will happen, they will continue to happen, and we know that they will happen again. We don't know when and to what severity, but it will happen. So this is my assessment on this, okay? And again, I apologize if I step in just to color.
Yeah, do you hear me now or not, Marco?
Now I can hear you, Jeb.
So, good.
I took your spot. I'm sorry.
No, very good, very good. I'm glad I'm in again. I switched the mic.
Good. So since you switched on the mic, you are ready to jump in a question that comes from the audience. On this topic. After I've digressed a bit on the impact in terms of conditions, we have a question from Toyin, who are asking how this likely change in the terms and conditions will impact the pricing of an insurance policy in the immediate future.
Yeah, the difficult part. What you see in the Dutch circumstances is we could procure actually all cure. So we procure all cure, and what we see happening is that we've got peaks, some small peaks actually, but there are far bigger, let's say, holes in treatments which has not happened. And like just stated, I fully agree. Part of that will return next year, but to be honest, I think 2/3 of it will not return, and we won't have to do that again. What you see is then that there is pretty big uncertainty about what will happen in the cost. And the difficulty we face, but the differences are pretty big between systems, is we are obliged to insure everyone. And in the Dutch circumstances, everyone is, let's say, trusting that they can go to every hospital and we will pay the bill. But what you see at the same time is that governments have stepped in, being heroes to a large extent, and they to a large extent walk with our wallet and say that there can never be an issue with this, there can never be an issue with that, etc., etc. We have to pay somehow. That's the difficult part. We would like to return to some sort of market circumstances in which you can, let's say, predict and negotiate and being somewhat competitive market with that. But you see that does not happen, not yet, because the uncertainty is still too big. And we've got flares and new breakouts and stuff like that. So that's a difficult situation. We face a lot of uncertainty. The good part, at least in the Netherlands, is we share the risk, so we don't know what it is, but we all hit the same way. So that helps a little bit. We try to capture a little bit of the advantages of this time. What you see in digitalization is actually in consultation. We see some breakthroughs on the positive side. On more the side of the really monitoring at home and providing medical service centers on a distance using artificial intelligence for treatment protocols and stuff like that. We see things not being that positive and actually more or less going down to some extent. So that's difficult. What we see as the positive thing is we can offer and actually do that until Parliament, and it's taken along with a lot of parties at this moment, is we are promoting freedom of choice. So we say, okay, we want to have people to have freedom of choice for digital treatments in the future. This should be, let's say, almost a human right and a patient right to ask for a digital treatment on a distance. And that will give us some breakthroughs. And there we see that we can maintain a lot of the new lessons we've learned from COVID for the future. If we don't do that, we'll fall back to the bad practice of the past with just one bad thing happening to us, that is governments have stepped in and to a large extent take our place in doing what we to some extent should have done ourselves. So that's a promising development, is giving them freedom of choice and spreading the digital treatments that way. And of course, a positive thing is that this really helps in capturing the mind of people, and lifestyle is an important thing in your life. We see a lot of people get awake on that because they see the differences between people who is really overweight and who is not overweight. So that's for a little speech on my side to capture up for the missing speaker for some time, and then we go back to the panel.
Excellent. Thank you, Jeb. I think you more than caught up with your contribution. And actually, this leads us to the end of this panel. We've reached the time. But now the coolest part of our session starts, because we have our Q&A, which are both for the panel, but also for all the presenters that presented today, both this afternoon, and if there are any residual questions coming from this morning. So over to you. You may use either the app or the Zoom platform for any additional questions. Please send them, as many as you can. And let's see if we can make this dialogue even more lively in this afternoon. Let's give it a little bit of time. Okay. Let's see how we're doing. I'm not seeing many questions yet.
Perhaps, Marco, do you mind if I ask you a question?
Of course, with pleasure.
Yeah. I asked this because we had a similar situation here in house, and I would just be curious to get your opinion on this. A person in a high risk category, let me put it this way, has contracted the COVID virus in the past, is simply self-quarantined, but is now having lasting effects. This particular person wants to purchase a travel insurance policy for the future, and he approaches Generali and your many good facilities there, and he fills out a questionnaire. And the questionnaire says, have you had any previous medical issues? Will you now include specifically whether or not a person has had the COVID virus, because they may have a compromised immune system now, which may put them in a higher risk category? How would you approach that from a policy wording point of view these days?
Yes. This is a very good question, because one of the key attributes of the virus, since its very initial definition, was one key operating word, and the word was novel. It is a new virus. It is new. We now understand the symptoms during the acute phase. You've seen the three typical charts, one that looks like a bell, the one that looks like a hump and goes up, and then one that looks like a really steep curve in case of very intensive care. So we know how the acute phase evolves. But what we don't know yet is what are the true long-term implications of the virus. It's still very new. So I think at the moment we are gathering, let's call it a so-called medical jurisprudence around it, meaning a larger number of cases of long-term situations, which range from respiratory diseases to general disablement in terms of mental and physical fatigue, reduced mobility, and so on. Now, some of these are indications that your immune system has been depleted. Some of them are indications of a prolonged stay in intensive care, so they may be resolved. Other ones could indicate a permanent damage to some of your organs and functionalities. It's fair to say that we are observing now. We are not yet in a position to include this as a, let's call it, pre-existing condition type of clause. Not yet. We are monitoring the situation. I don't think there is a sufficient degree of knowledge or comfort in being able to assess you caught the virus and therefore we should consider you as a loaded risk, to use an insurance parlance. Not yet. How will it happen in the future? Again, for me, here it's difficult to say, but we can assume that in the severe forms of the virus, where it is fairly demonstrated that there are some long-term damages to your health, we may need to include that as a possible cause to be declared in your application form.
Yeah, exactly what I thought, but I think this certainly will have an impact on policy wording and how the policy is put together, and undoubtedly insurers around the world are seeing that there is perhaps the need as well to clarify the terms and conditions of their policies as well, to make it clear to the consumer what they're covered for and what they're not covered for.
Correct. Talking about this, we have a question from Alexandra. And Alexandra, please, then you will have to tell us why does it say question from Rosetta? Okay, I'm intrigued. I don't know what it means, but anyway, the question is very valid. In the market, which reinsurers are taking the pandemic risk? And it's a question for all the panelists as well as prior speakers, if anybody want to answer. Nobody wants to answer.
No, I can state something.
Go, Jeb. Come on, go.
Yeah, in the Dutch circumstances, we don't reinsure. We take this risk ourselves, but then that is also possible because we have, let's say, an arrangement that everyone is insuring everything. So then you can do this without harming your competitive position. So that's I guess at least one way to solve this, and being able to insure people who have had COVID in the future as well. But I'm not sure which reinsurance company will take on this risk. It's pretty big.
And I can reinforce this comment, if you allow me to do this, in the sense that in my experience at the moment, reinsurers are not keen on pricing this risk. There is very little appetite, there's little capacity. And even in terms of modeling the possible reinsurance cost of the pandemic risk, typically on a non-proportional basis as a sort of an excess of loss or possibly an aggregate stop loss, there is still a lot of uncertainty. Understandably, because when we're talking about pandemic, we're talking about the perfect storm that combines together very high severity, but also a potentially infinite frequency. That is what skews and disrupts all the traditional pricing models for insurers. Yeah. Insurers can manage severity with a low frequency, or they can manage high frequency of low severity homogeneous claims. When you have the two combinations, that's when it becomes really tricky.
Yeah, and to be honest, then in this circumstance, this pandemic was still, let's say, affordable. We ain't seen nothing yet, because when this would be, let's say, we have in the 19th century, in the 20th century, seen far more severe pandemic illnesses than this one. And that would be really uncoverable, because then you would have your large volumes and your large claims as well, which is a perfect storm. More than this even, perfect tornado, something like that.
Yes. We can go to the next question for all speakers. Do you think that the high investment required for the digitalization of all services will be balanced by the saving on utilization? Will this be reflected in the premiums? Jump in, guys.
I could jump in.
Please.
If you want. Yeah, I think, I mean, I can't speak in terms of insurers, in terms of the cost of digitizing services, but I think you sort of look at it that digitizing some of these services can sort of create some savings, whether it's automating claims authorization, automating some of the way that information is shared between an insurer and a digital partner, and reducing that cost. There might be some overhead fixed costs. But I guess it's sort of utilization is we've sort of seen is a bit of a nasty word in a way. You don't want to drive utilization of a service, but it's almost is that utilization of one service able to save costs downstream. I think when we started working with AXA 5 years ago, it was in response to sort of what the market was doing, and typically insurers don't pay for primary care GPs. But you sort of realize, though, after a while that you could get a primary care GP that will be cheaper than a specialist, and you could start diverting people into the right pathways. There are opportunities to save costs downstream, even though you might be utilizing a service that you wouldn't traditionally pay for. So I think it's how you could sort of save it downstream by, creating greater directionality of care or sort of controlling and standardizing pathways.
If I could jump in as well, Marco, I agree with what Paul just said 100%. In fact, we are required by our clients to prove that the digitization, that the steerage we are doing, it works. Okay, we can't expect a client to come to us and say, "Oh, we believe you just because you're nice guys." We need to report back to the clients how many clients we've steered and what we have saved. What have we saved by using telemedicine as opposed to sending a person to an emergency room? What have we saved by using a virtual doctor or by sending a physician to somebody's hotel room? I can state without compromise here, yes, it does save money. It truly drives down your net paid claims costs. This is the unique thing. You're actually adding more service. You're giving the customer a better journey, and you're driving down your net paid claims costs.
Yeah, and I can add a little bit there. That is, it also depends upon how you use the technology. Yeah. So when we use this technology just to automate what we did in the past, you get what you had in the past. So when we just do, let's say, consults, and it's still face-to-face physical consults like we always have, but now they're digital consults, but it's the same hours, same procedures, stuff like that. Yeah, nothing really happens. What you would like to happen is that you integrate symptom checkers, you get better advices, you use this to have self-help things in place, and then you've got more of a stepped approach in which you state, okay, first people are going to check themselves. There's some symptoms. We can give them advice. If they need more, you get let's say, your virtual consult, which is pretty fast. And then you can move on to the system, to the right place and the proper care on the proper place. And when you really shift towards, let's say, giving the proper care on the proper place, there are large savings to be made, because we see a lot of people ending up in hospitals who should not be in hospitals, or having treatments which they should not have at all, or being told all sort of things where they could also listen to it themselves and help themselves. So when we start to use this digitalization really to change care paths and treatment paths, then we start to save money. When it's just about automating and make it more simple to call and speak to someone, then it will add cost in the long run.
Thank you, Jeb. We have one more question. It looks like it's going to be the last one because we're about to close now, but it's an important one. From Diana. Thank you, Diana. Do you think the variable standards and clinical pathways for COVID treatment and vaccines national strategies creating non-consistency in the insurance industry worldwide? So this is about the variability of the standards, the lack of homogeneity in the clinical pathways, the differences. All this is creating entropy and non-consistency. What is your view?
I can jump in quickly and say from our perspective, Diana is right. There is a certain inconsistency in the clinical pathways. We here at Global Excel, as an example, we for U.S. cases we're using Milliman guidelines, which in the United States creates a consistent pathway. That's not the same thing as in Japan. That's not the same thing as in Australia when we have a case in Australia or in Germany or in Russia or in Uganda. So I think there are inconsistencies, and that then creates issues with with our clients, who are the insurers upstream, and that we're having to adjust depending on where the claim is occurring in the world.
Yeah, I think, I guess in terms of adding, I think where we saw it, especially at the very beginning of COVID and some of the lockdowns, we actually had quite a bit of patients calling in and asking for advice because they were hearing so much noise. And I think we made a really specific point of ensuring we were connected with Public Health England and the NHS, so that our GPs were sort of working with national guidelines and providing support to patients who were hearing quite a bit that was going on. But interestingly, we also saw a lot of the corporate customers from AXA, their HR directors, trying to find out, getting through the noise, this vacuum of information, getting through the noise to find out what sort of advice, what should they be doing with their offices? Do they close the office? Do they make people work from home when they're working from home? What do we do about occupational health standards? So in a way, there are, across national boundaries, there are varying clinical standards. But I think where we were able to try and bring some consistency in helping people with managing advice, but also getting connected into national testing systems.
Thank you, guys. I think we have time for one last question. It comes from the chat in our group from Toyin to all the panelists, who tells us that the experience in Nigeria is quite interesting. Members have abandoned the telemedicine service and started showing up providers in huge droves. Is it because the low impact of the virus in this part of the world is responsible?
I don't know if I could speak to the Nigerian context, but in terms of yes, when the world somewhat goes back to normal, if there is a new normal, people will want to go and see their GPs or go to their hospital, and so there are some elements of especially where you see chronic diseases that have gotten worse when people being locked up at home, they will have to go to in-person modalities. I think though, for a lot of people, it's almost sort of made them realize that there are digital tools out there, telemedicine tools that are out there that are a lot more convenient. And I think for employers, seeing a reduction in absenteeism because they don't have to book a half day off to go to a doctor. They can just sort of jump in a meeting room and sort of talk to someone. So certainly I think it's just making people realize that there are far more convenient tools if a digital telemedicine platform is appropriate for what they're dealing with.
Yeah, and I agree with Paul on that one. Yeah. If we had an expat, as an example, if we had a client who had an expat in Nigeria, we would not be recommending an in-person visit. We would try every available tool before sending him to visit a clinic or visit a doctor, if appropriate. Don't misunderstand me. If he needs to go to the emergency room, he has to go to an emergency room. But even then, we are considering the options. Okay, can we move that patient perhaps out of Nigeria, maybe over to the Emirates or down to South Africa or back to his home country for if extensive treatment is required. There aren't any easy answers to this one right here. You know, it's quite possible that in Nigeria that it's a phenomena that is unique. We're certainly not seeing that in other parts of the world. People are embracing at this point in time the digital options before an in-person visit.
Yeah. What I can add a little bit is it's interesting to see what's happening in countries like Nigeria, but also Kenya with M-Pesa and the payment systems there, which are totally on mobile. And in India and China, of course, because there you see what happens when you reinvent a healthcare infrastructure from start. Well, in the Netherlands, we've got 95 hospitals, which is really stupid and crazy. Yeah? You don't when you would start over, you wouldn't originate 95 hospitals. That's pretty stupid. But of course, The question is to avoid is a long time we've been in, let's say, some sort of arguments. Everything should be digital, everything should be physical, and digital is superior on physical or whatever. When you discuss things and have contact with your parents or your kids or your friends, you don't ask yourself, now we're going to do everything by phone or everything via WhatsApp, and we can only see each other physical. It's about finding the proper combination of things which works for you. And that's why I like those sort of approaches, as giving people the freedom to choose what part of treatments they want to receive, let's say digital, at home, where they really want to interact. For instance, in mental care, it's sometimes good to have a short, fast access to discuss in a crisis situation. But when you really want to go in depth into your youth, don't do that on Zoom for 2 hours or 3 hours, I can imagine. So we should really find the blended ways to do this, and also blend digital advices and artificial intelligence, but then it's more helped intelligence than purely artificial, into regular treatment paths, and find then the way how that works, and then discover where we end up and what works best.
Very good. Thank you, guys. I think we covered all the questions from the floor. I'm trying to see in case we left anything out. No, I don't think so. And we are actually right on time to close today's session. So to be honest, I don't have anything else to remark because everything today pretty much has been said. So I will not steal time from all of you. We all probably need to go back to our normal work now and try to catch up what we needed to do for the day. So I would like to thank you for your exceptional contribution, but also for your engagement in entertaining the questions, in creating a very lively dialogue and debate. So a big thank you for everything you've done for the success of this first day. And then I'm happy now to give the word to the conference organizers for the closing remarks of day one.